Hi folks, this is Tim Garman for SIT, facilitating on NZDP101, and we're looking at Photoshop, the very first time we've opened this up with no images there, but I just want to run through some of the things that we're looking at. So we have a menu across the top. Just below that, in the window, at the top of the window, we have the options strip, and these details in the options strip will change depending on which tool we have selected. And here we have the tools on the left. Over on the right, we've got palettes, and let's just get into this in a little more detail. First thing to say is that don't let Photoshop intimidate you. A lot of these menus actually repeat things, so you can find some things up in the menus at the top repeated when we look at menus in the palettes, and you'll see each palette has a menu in the corner. And a lot of that is repeated, so you can find the same thing in different places. And it does tend to make Photoshop look bigger than it actually is. So on the left with the tools, let me first of all just mention about the tools that under Window in the menu at the top, we have a thing called Workspace. And we can set up our workspace, which dictates which tools and palettes are shown, depending on what type of work we want to do. Now, you might think you want to choose photography, but I tend to have mine just set on Essentials Default. The reason being that that seems to offer me the most options for tools. You'll find with other, if you select something else, some of these things will disappear. But that's not a problem, because if, for instance, we find that all our palettes are not there, if we look at the Window menu, we'll find a list of the palettes, and the ones that are ticked are already present on the right. So just select one of the other ones. If we want to look at some fonts, we can choose Character, and we see we've got a fonts menu or palette displayed. If I click the tab, that will disappear, and we see that it's actually still there but hidden. So coming back to the tools, we've got a little arrow at the top. If you prefer to see it all in one long line, you can set them like that. Personally, I prefer them double banked. And I don't know why. I think it seems to me they're a bit larger, but maybe they're not. Maybe that's just me. But I prefer to see them double banked anyway. One other point I'll make about the tools palette is that you'll see in some of these tools there's a little triangle in the bottom right corner. If you click and hold, that will reveal some other tools. And if your tool palette doesn't look like mine, it may just be that you have one of those other tools selected. So you can always just hold the mouse down and select the top one on the list. Now, I'm not going to go into every single thing about Photoshop. It would take too long on this initial video. I'm going to pick out a few things, just running through the tool palette. We've got the mover tool. We've got the rectangular marquee tool and some other shapes of tools which are used for selection. Equally for selection, we have got the polygonal lasso tool, and there is details of what some of these tools do in your study guide. The magnetic lasso tool and the lasso tool, all used for selecting areas. Then we've got the magic wand tool, and quick selection and object selection tools. Again, selection tools which you will choose depending on what kind of image you're working on and what sort of area you want to select. We've already seen the crop tool and some other ways of cropping images. We've got the frame tool, eyedropper with other versions of the eyedropper and other measurement tools. We've got the spot removal tool and patch tool, healing brush tool, for healing and editing specific areas. We've got a brush tool. You would expect to see that with pencils and other options there. We've got the clone stamp tool, which we're going to be using a fair bit, so we'll find out more about what that does. History and art brush tools, eraser, that's pretty obvious what that does. We've got a gradient tool, that's fairly obvious what that does, but we'll be looking at that in more detail. We can smudge, blur and sharpen our images. We can darken or lighten using the dodge and burn tool to lighten and darken specific areas. We've got a pen tool, and I'll be going into detail on that. We can add type. We've got selecting and paths, and various shapes we can draw. Some of these we're not going to be using on this course. And we can move our images around using the hand tool. We've got a magnification option as well. So there's a bunch of tools there, and we can actually even edit what we see there if we wanted to. Just below that, we've got a way of looking at our background and foreground colours. And we'll be getting more into that as well later on. And just at the bottom, ways of displaying what we see in terms of more of a presentation screen, I guess, not something we'll be using for this course at the moment. And just as I mentioned previously, when we select a tool, let's select something different, a brush tool, we get a different set of options in the options strip. We've got a way of changing our brush size with some presets with hard and soft edges, and we can change the size with the sliders. At the moment this is set to a soft edge, so the hardness is 0, but we can make it a hard edge by setting the hardness to 100%. Over on the right, as I mentioned, we have palettes. We've got a colour palette, we've got swatches of colours, we've got a gradient palette and patterns as well. If we double click a tab, it'll open it up. Nothing in here on properties at the moment. So if we double click again, that will close that down. Layers, channels, paths, all of these we're going to be looking at as we begin to open up images and work on them. So let's do that. Let's open an image. Now, you can drag and drop an image from your desktop into the Photoshop window. I prefer to go to the file and either file open, and you'll notice now I'm on a Mac, and on my Mac menus I have all the keyboard shortcuts listed on the right, and it's useful to start to learn some of these just because it speeds up the way you work. Command O, or on a PC I think that would be Control O, would open your image, but I'm going to suggest that we open our Brighton Storm image using Open as Smart Object. Now, first of all, you should have downloaded the Brighton Storm image from Blackboard. So that should be sitting on your computer somewhere. So if you select Open as Smart Object, you're then going to need to browse for it. And I've just put mine on the desktop in a Photoshop intro folder. And there it is. So that's my Brighton Storm image. Just before we click Open, you notice it's a .crw file. So that file extension at the end indicates that it's a Camera Raw file. Now, Camera Raw is a module within Photoshop. So if you have Photoshop, you will have Camera Raw. And different cameras create different file extensions at the end of their files. So not every Camera Raw file will have CRW against it. But if we open it up, we click Open, and let's just resize this so that it's visible in my recording window. So the image opens up in Adobe Camera Raw, often shortened to ACR. Now, some of you may be familiar with Lightroom, or Lightroom Classic really is the one to be using because it's a bigger version of Lightroom. And there are a lot of similarities between Camera Raw and Lightroom. So some of the editing you can do to begin with in Lightroom on this paper, and we will expect, or I'll expect you to be opening up each image that you download to edit and begin to look at it in Lightroom or Camera Raw. I would suggest if you already know Lightroom, then let's learn something new. Let's learn how to use Camera Raw. And you're going to be editing each image for things like exposure before you start any other Photoshop editing. So let's look at the Camera Raw screen that we have here. Now, the reason why we open this file using Open as Smart Object in Photoshop is that this is using a non-destructive method. So what that does is it creates a link between Photoshop and Camera Raw such that you can switch and hop between both Photoshop and Camera Raw, and within Camera Raw you will be able to save the edits that you do. So you can always come back into Camera Raw with the image with all those editing modifications that you've made and readjust them. Or if you want to get back to the original unedited version, you can do that as well. And I'll show you how to do that shortly. Again, I'm not going to go too deeply into Camera Raw at the moment because there will be a specific Camera Raw video on Blackboard for you. So here we're looking at the Brighton Storm image, and in Camera Raw, let me hide some of the Photoshop interface so that it doesn't confuse you. So we've got a menu down the right hand side with various tabs, and we've got a histogram at the top. Now there's more information about histograms as we go through the course. Briefly, what we can do is if we use these two little boxes at the top, the left-hand box shows us any area on our image that is too dark, and it'll be highlighted in blue. And there isn't really anything here that is underexposed, except just on the left-hand edge, you'll see highlighted in blue some small areas that are disappearing, or the detail is disappearing in shadow. There's probably not anything to worry about, it's such a minor thing there. We can switch that off and you'll notice that those blue highlights disappear. Again, we can, on the left hand side, we can look at anything that might be overexposed, and there's nothing here. If there was, and I could demonstrate that for us just by increasing the whites. You'll see now that some of the areas of the waves are burnt out, overexposed, and they're highlighted in red. So we can turn that off, but that is an indicator of areas in our image that are either overexposed or underexposed. And just if I double click that slider, I'll go back to the center. So first of all, we're going to set our profile to Adobe Color. It just gives us a bit of a wider color gamut. And then we're going to have a look at the Basic tab. So what do we need to do to this image? Well, first of all, we need to turn it to black and white. We've got a black and white button. Let's just close that tab down again. We've got a black and white button at the top, and if we click that, we see instantly it turns to black and white. I'm going to undo that by hitting Command Z, or for you, if you're on a PC, Control Z, because we could also go to Profile and select Monochrome, which does the same thing. And there is actually other ways of turning images to black and white too, but we'll stick to a simple approach for this first video. So let's use that black and white button, and then we're going to want to do some further editing. Now you notice when let's just undo that once more, we've got a color mixer tab down here, and that's something we're going to be looking at. When we hit the black and white button, you notice that changes to a black and white mixer. If we open up that black and white mixer, we have a bunch of colours here, even though we're working in black and white. So bearing in mind that we've got a seascape here where there's probably blues in the sky, although it looks a bit grey, but there will be blues in there. So we might find that if we change the red slider, it's not going to have a lot of effect because there's not much red in there. But blues has a bit of an effect. Let's double click that again. Let's try yellows. So there's quite a lot of yellow down in the grasses and amongst the greens as well. Double click that, we can change the greens. That has a bit of an effect. So we can adjust our image using these sliders. So let's just take the aquas and the blues up a bit because we want to create more of a moody kind of dramatic scene. Let's take the yellows up to darken down the corner to frame the image a bit more perhaps. Try oranges. You see there are oranges down in that area as well. Not much on the magenta slider or the purple. So let's take the aquas and the blues up a bit more. Okay, so that's a start. Let's go up and have a look at the basic tab. We've got a white balance setting. I'm going to leave it there because I think anything we choose from there is actually going to lighten things up a bit. So we want to darken it down. So let's take the exposure down. So this obviously affects the whole of the image. We can adjust whites and highlights or blacks and shadows as much as we'd like to. So if we have a look at some of these blacks and shadows, would be something to play with. We can also look at texture and clarity. Now if you've got an image that's not quite sharp, a bit of clarity would help. But also, as we look at the sky, it may be that we want to increase some of this cloud texture. And if we look at that and increase the texture, you can see this area here is punching out a lot more. Now we do need to be careful that we want to maintain a natural look. We don't want it to look fake or obviously edited. So I would suggest that you make these more subtle adjustments. And that will be probably all we need to do in the basic tab. Now just looking quickly through, we've got colour adjustments. We can look at sharpening and noise reduction. We've already looked at the black and white mixer, which is a colour mixer when we're dealing with a colour image. We can deal with colour grading, which used to be called split toning in older versions of Photoshop. And we've also got optics, where we can remove any colour aberrations that we might see that can be caused by lenses and light refraction. Geometry is useful, and just so let's close that down because you may see it like that to begin with. And you've got some manual transformations. So we could adjust the vertical adjustment, and you notice you get a grid to line things up with, or horizontal. Let's get that back to where it was. We can rotate, and that might be useful particularly with images where you have a horizon. You want to make sure that that horizon is straight, unless you're going for some kind of arty approach where you don't need that. But here it's a bit difficult to tell if that horizon is straight because you've got waves breaking over the top of it. So I tend to leave it where it is. And you've got some other options for scale. and offsetting the X and Y coordinates. So that's geometry. We've got some effects where we can add grain. As I said earlier, let's keep things natural looking. And that's a good rule of thumb for this course. We can do lots of weird and wonderful things, make the sky green and all that sort of thing. However, that relies on whether people like that or not. And it's very hard to then grade something on the basis of that. So I'm going to suggest we keep things looking natural so that we can compare things with nature to see if they look right or not. And then once you've got more of a grasp of Photoshop, you can start to be more artistic with some of these effects. We've got a vignetting option as well. And lastly, calibration. Not something we're really going to use, other than I would just suggest that you make sure it's set to the current version. It does have some options for legacy versions, so just make sure that's version 5 current. Next, we're going to have a look at doing some targeted editing, darkening the sky and trying to create a bit more mood and atmosphere and drama in this image. So we're going to come over to the masking option and just to point out that we've got some tools on the far right hand side. We've got a crop tool. Let's just run through these. Similar to the crop tool found in Photoshop, it divides the image into 9 squares, so it's very useful to work with the rule of thirds, and dragging the sides or the corners in will crop the image. And just to point out that you notice that when we move outside the corner, our arrow becomes a two-headed curved arrow, and that's for rotating. So we can rotate when we crop as well. We've got a healing brush. We've got a masking, which I'm going to come onto just very shortly to show you how to do some targeted masking. We've got a red eye option, and we can create snapshots to record our edits. And lastly, we've got some presets, and we're going to leave the presets. There's a lot of presets. If I open those up, a lot of presets we could use for any of our images, but we want to learn how to do things from scratch, so we've got total control. So for the moment we're going to leave presets alone, and it's also worth saying that when we've got one of these menus open, we just go back to the top menu, it closes everything down and gets back to where we were. So let's go to the masking option. Click there and we get to this window that opens up. Now we're going to want to use the brush. We do that, we get this palette opening up, and if we add, we're going to create a new mask. So let's click plus, select brush, and we get the brush option. Now when we've got that selected, you'll note the 2 circles. The inner circle is where the solid hard edge of the brush is, and the outer circle defines the fade. So it fades from the outside in. Now I can reduce or enlarge the size of my brush by using the wheel on my mouse. If you have a wheel, I can go up and down. And you'll notice the slider over here moves as well, so you can use the slider too. And you can adjust the feather, so the feather being that outer edged circle. So if I reduce that down, you'll see it's now much narrower. But I can do that with my mouse as well by just holding the shift key down and using the wheel. So if I release the shift key, then I've got the size. So 2 ways of controlling that. I'm going to want to darken the whole of this sky, but not affect the area below the horizon. So I'm going to want quite a large brush for that. So let's increase the brush size. And you notice on the palette I've got show overlay. So we're going to start outside the edge of our our image. And just so that you know how to reduce and enlarge, if I hold the Command key down, or on a Mac, Control key on a PC, and use the minus key, I can go down, and the plus key will bring it back up again. And I believe, let's just try this. Yeah, so if I use Command or Control 0, the image just fills the screen. I'm just going to bring it down a little bit, so I've got a bit of space around the image. One other thing is that the space bar gives us the option of moving around in that way, particularly useful if we've gone quite large and we're wanting to move around an image. So we've got this large brush with a mask created, and we're going to just go over the whole image. So you notice it's in pink. So that is the mask indicated in pink. So I'm going to carefully try and avoid the hills, but it is a soft edge, so to the brush with the feather selected from that outer circle to the inner one. So we're not going to get a hard edge anywhere. So that's selected that sky area. I can now come down to some of the other controls we have in the masking area, and we've got, under the light tab, we've got exposure. So as soon as I start to move that, you see the mask disappears, or is hidden. It doesn't disappear, it's hidden. And I can just reduce the exposure on the sky. So you can take it as dark as you like, it's up to you really, but bearing in mind you want it to be, or look, realistic. So let's not go too wild, but it wants to be a dark, stormy day or evening perhaps. The next thing we're going to do is lighten up this area just to create a bit of contrast. So we're going to click the create new mask button again, and we'll choose brush again. And this time we want a slightly smaller brush, so we're going to just reduce it down and just put a bit of light coming through the sky. So it's up to you really where you put that, but that's the mask. And now we're going to go down to exposure. And as soon as we move the slider, mask is hidden, and we're going to this time increase the exposure, and we can see we're creating a bit of light as if the sun is just hiding behind those clouds there. So that's some of the editing that we can do in Camera Raw. Let's come back to our original screen. So do have a play with some of those tools and experiment with some of the edits that you can do in Camera Raw. One other thing I'll point out is these three dots on the far right menu. And that's a use, if we open this up, one useful thing here to point out is that we have a reset to default option. So if you ever want to get back to the unedited version of Brighton Storm image, or any other image for that matter, you can use that option. And that's really one of the reasons why using Camera Raw is a non-destructive process, because you can always get back to your original unedited image, and you can also flip between Photoshop and Camera Raw very easily to continue with your editing. So we're going to assume that now we're happy with how this is looking, and we're going to go OK. Now you see we've opened it up now in Photoshop, so clicking OK brings it back into Photoshop. And I will have to crop the image, and I could have cropped it in Camera Raw, but I'm going to do that in Photoshop, and I'll show you why. Now that we've got an image in Photoshop, let's have a look at the layer palette, because we can see that with the layer palette open here on the right, we have a thumbnail of our image. And you'll notice in the bottom right corner of the thumbnail, and just on the thumbnail, if you wanted to see that thumbnail a bit larger, if you went down to panel options, you can choose a larger size. I've got it set to the smallest size, or you can set it to none. But in that thumbnail, there's this little document symbol in the bottom right corner, and that indicates that this image is a smart object. Now, how is that useful? Well, if you double click that, it opens up in Camera Raw, and you, with all the editing remembered, and you can continue to re-edit and improve on your edit if you need to, or you can get back to your original unedited document. So let's just cancel that. We will get back to Photoshop and have a look at the layers palette. So in the layers palette, each of these palettes has a menu in the corner, and you can create a new layer. Shift Command N on a Mac, or Shift Control N, I think it will be on a PC, will create a new layer, and we get the opportunity to name our layer here. It's a good idea to do that. So I haven't named it, but I can double click on the text there and to type it in as well. The reason why it's a good idea to name a layer is because as we move through this paper, we're going to have images with multiple layers as we do our editing on different layers. It's not uncommon to have 20 or more layers, and if they're just called layer 1, layer 2, layer 3, it's going to be very confusing to know what's actually on them. But if you give it a meaningful name, that will just help you to know what each one contains. Now you can switch on and off the layers by clicking these eye icons. So if I switched off the Brighton Storm layer, we're only then looking at layer 1. And there's nothing on layer 1. So we've got this checkerboard effect. Now that is the way that Photoshop shows transparency. So there's nothing on that layer, and it's a transparent layer. Now, it couldn't be white because white is a color, and it wouldn't be transparent. It would hide or anything that was below it. But because it's a transparent layer, you can, and if we switch the Brighton Storm layer back on, we can see through the top layer to the layer below. So we can also change the order of our layers. So if I wanted to bring my layer above, below the Brighton Storm layer, maybe I've got a whole bunch of layers and I need to change the order, we can do that easily. And if I needed to reduce my layers back down to one layer, I can go to the menu and choose Flatten Image. And then that brings it back to one layer again. Now you'll notice when it's one single layer, which is how it will be when you first open Photoshop, or open the image in Photoshop, it's got a padlock against the layer. Now if we had multiple layers, let's create another layer, I can't drag another layer below the background layer. You'll notice at the moment it's called background. It's changed from Brighton Storm to background. That's just happened as I've been messing around with these layers. I'm not able to drag the layer below a background layer because the background layer is always the bottom layer. So if we wanted to do that, we'd need to unlock it just by clicking the padlock. And then again, it changes the layer name to layer 0. So we've just got to watch the names, and if we're editing, we can now change the orders again. If we're editing and something we do changes the name of one of the layers, just you need to retype that in. So I'm going to flatten that back down again. The next stage we'll want to do when we get to this point is we're going to want to save it. Now we've got further edits to do, but we're just going to save it to begin with. And so we'll go up to File, and we'll go to Save As. and we've got a name. I'm going to take the, we're going to rename it, and now you'll notice on when you read through your study guide that on page 10 there's some very useful information about resizing your images and naming your images. So there's a naming convention for how all your images need to be named, and so if you look at page 10 of the study guide, the correct naming will be either starting with the name of the paper, NZDP101, or you can just put in 101, it's up to you. So 101, instead of a space, I'm going to use a hyphen. Then I'm going to put in a 1 to indicate the week, because we're on the first week, and another hyphen. Then I'm going to put my name in. Now, I don't mind how you configure that, whether you put your surname first or second, whether you put a hyphen between your first name and surname. And then lastly, we'll put the name of the image, Brighton Storm. And I'm going to say this is going on my computer. So I'll then need to select where, and that's fine for me. Just one other thing though to point out here. As we're saving this, we've got some options, and the default option is Photoshop, which means it's a .psd file. Now that is correct for this stage, because that will save your image and include any layers that you created. Now we haven't got a layer currently because I got rid of it. But if this was a multiple layered file, all those layers would be saved when it's a .psd. So this means we're going to have a master file, which is a file we haven't changed the size or the resolution. So it's going to be the best quality version of our image, and that will be with all the layers that we may have created, and it will be a .psd. So that's correct, correctly named. We can just click save, and we've now saved our file, and there's a new file name, and that conforms to the naming conventions that SIT require. So the important thing here is that when we're going to resize this, because the study guide requires us to resize and save and I'll submit all the files to the size of 1500 pixels on the longest edge, and I'll show you how to do that shortly. But of course that's going to be a smaller file than our original, so we have a master file that is higher resolution and full size, and we have a cropped down and a resized image that we're going to make sure all our layers are flattened, and we're going to save as a JPEG. So the next stage is to crop our image. So we could have cropped it in Camera Raw, but I'm going to suggest we crop in Photoshop. So here's the crop tool in Photoshop, and you see it puts a box around our image. If we click once, we get the grid, which may well help us if we're composing our image according to the rule of thirds. So to do that, we might feel that we want to put the horizon on the top third, and so we can adjust, and we may feel we want to just perhaps bring in the side a little bit. Now you notice when we move it, we do get a counter at the side, telling us in millimeters what that measures. Now we can change that to read as pixels, which would be helpful, and we would do that by going to the preferences or options setting. Preferences is up under File. No, it's not. It's under Photoshop, sorry, on the Mac, but it's called Options on the PC. It's one of the few changes or differences between the Mac and PC version of Photoshop. Now, as I said, we can move our crop around. So we've set the top third on the horizon. If we just double click that, that will crop. I'm going to just undo that. Command Z or Control Z. Click again. It's because it may be that we want to crop it so that the horizon's on the bottom third. And that might be a more logical thing since we've worked on the sky. Perhaps we're making the sky more of a feature. So one other thing to point out, and this is quite important, when we're cropping, if we look up in the options strip, we've got a box that says delete cropped pixels. And at the moment, that's not checked. And I would suggest that you leave it unchecked, because when it's unchecked, you'll see you can still see some of this image outside of the cropped area. So when you crop it, that part that we cropped out will still be available should we need to get back to it. So for instance, if I wanted to go back and adjust the crop, that part of the image is still there. So that's what that box does. So leave it unchecked and you'll be able to return to any parts that you've cropped out. So let's say we're going to crop it to have the horizon on the bottom third. So looking at the layers palette, you'll notice when we crop, the layer changes from a background layer to a floating layer. So now the important thing here is that when we save our image for submission, it needs to be a JPEG. Again, the details of that are on page 10 of the study guide. But you won't have JPEG as an option all the time you have floating layers. So that's why we do need to flatten things. So we'll flatten that image back down to a background layer. So now we've cropped our image, the next thing to do is resize our image ready for submission. So if I go up to the image menu right at the top, come down to image size. We get the image size box. And this shows us a number of things. Shows us the size of our image, shows us the resolution, and various other things which I'm not going to go into at the moment. But one thing we can do is change the units that we're reading these sizes in. So I'm going to change millimeters to pixels. Yours may be on a different setting. We've got various other things like centimeters and inches, etc. I'm going to change to pixels. And so we see that this image, we've cropped the height down a little bit. We didn't really touch the width. So at the moment, it's measuring 3072 pixels wide and 1587 pixels deep or high, at a resolution of 300 pixels per inch. 300 generally considered high resolution. So we're going to want to change the width of our image to 1500. Now, I'll show you shortly how to create a portrait crop of this image. But for the moment, if we type in 1500 on the width, you'll see that the height has changed automatically. And that's because the two measurements are linked. You can see here the linking lines that link these two measurements. Now it's important that you make sure that that is linked and that the second measurement does change when you type in the first one. Because if it doesn't, and you can actually, this link icon here, if you click that and the lines disappear, if I now typed a measurement in here, in the width, the height wouldn't change. So and then when I pressed OK, what I'd end up with is a distorted image because I would have changed the width without changing the height. So it's very important to make sure that you have those two measurements linked, and that's just gone back to the original. So let's put that back in again, 1500, so that the height changes as well. So we can now click OK and just go to the mover tool to remove the crop boundary. We've now resized that to an image that's suitable to be submitted. So we know that it's 1500 pixels wide. Now the height, as long as it's less than 1500 pixels, it doesn't really matter what the height is. So now we want to save our file as a JPEG. And in this instance, that option will be under Save a Copy. So we choose the format and we see JPEG as an option. Now, just to point out that if we just close that down for a minute, that option to save as a JPEG can sometimes be found under Save As. In this instance, it's not there. You'll notice JPEG 2000 is there. That's not a format that's often used. But it just depends on what editing we've been doing, because in this instance, Save as a JPEG is under Save a Copy. So just check those two options, Save As or Save as a JPEG, and you'll find in one of them, JPEG is there available as the format. So that's what we want to save as. We're going to save, and we get a JPEG options box, which just gives us the opportunity to change the quality. Well, I've never changed this, but so always make sure it's set to maximum with the slider over to the right. The only instance where you might want to change this is if you were emailing a file and you wanted to reduce the file size, but it does reduce the quality as well. So keep it on maximum and we will go OK. Now, just one thing to point out here is that we still have our PSD open. That is because we saved a copy rather than Save As. If we have Save As, we would see our JPEG here. When we have Save as a Copy, and we use that function, it saves a copy as a JPEG, but leaves our PSD open. But it's just worth pointing out that this is the PSD with the resizing applied to it. So we don't want to save that. So we can close this file down, and I'm going to do that by going Command W on my Mac. It'll be Control W on a PC. If I do that, we get a question as to whether we want to save it. We don't want to save edits to our PSD in terms of the size, so we'll go No. And just to prove that, if I try and reopen it and reopen my PSD file, I'll see it's the full size. So that is good. That's what we want. Now, we've also got to create a portrait crop. So this is how we create it. This is why one of the reasons why we need a master file, because we want to go back to our full-size image to create a portrait crop. So here I've got my full-size PSD image open. It's the one that we've cropped in terms of putting the horizon on the bottom third, but it's still the full width. We've reduced the height a little bit. And we can just remind ourselves, having a look at image size. So it's 372 pixels wide, 1579 pixels high. So if we want to create a portrait image, the height is going to be taller than the width. And we know that the maximum length on the longest edge that SIT require is 1500 pixels. Well, this is almost 1500 pixels. So let's change that and make that fit 1500. So we see that the width changes a little bit. And we go OK. So we now know that that is 1500 pixels high. If we now crop it and just bring the edges in, and actually this is where it would be a good idea to change our measurements to pixels. So I'm going to just undo that and show you how to do it. So we go to Photoshop, and I'm going to Preferences, and that's because I'm on a Mac. If you're on a PC, you'll need to look for Options, and I don't remember where it is exactly, but it might be under Edit, and I think it's down the bottom somewhere. You'll have a setting for Options, and it does basically the same thing as Preferences on a Mac. And I want to scroll down and look for Units and Rulers. So I'm going to change my unit rulers, my units, or ruler units, I should say, from millimeters to pixels, and just hit OK. And now, when I change my crop, you see it's measuring in pixels. That's far more useful for what we want. So we know it's already 1500 pixels high. So I've just got to choose a crop that I like, maybe with a bit of C and a bit of any crop on the width that's under 1500 will be okay. So if I'm going to come out to maybe 1000, perhaps roughly 1000, that would be fine. So if I double click there, there's my portrait crop. Now I think at this stage I might just show you another crop we can do, because what if you don't like that particular crop? You want a crop that goes back to the original size, maybe takes a bit off the top and bottom as well. So now that we've changed to pixels as a measurement, we can do that fairly easily. And if we take, we're just over 1500 at the moment, maybe we want to lose a little bit of sky, for instance. So let's bring the, and you could do it both ways, perhaps we'll lose a bit of sky and a bit of the bottom as well. Now, if you find it hard to get it exactly on 1500 pixels, you may want to increase the image on the screen a little bit. Just you can use the magnification tool for that, or Command plus or minus, or control on a Mac, Control plus or minus on a PC will do that. So we now know that it's. Let's just double check that. Get it to 1500. A bit fiddly. In fact, I'm going to undo that and blow it up a bit. I should find it easier to do that. I'll take a bit off the bottom. There we go. Okay, so that is 1500 pixels high. And now let's do the width again, which is anywhere under 1500. I tend not to be very keen on square images, which would be 1500 by 1500, simply because it's a bit more tricky to play with the rule of thirds on a square image, but in some instances they're okay. So there we go. I'm going to double click that, and let's just double check my size. Image size is 1500 high by 1110 pixels wide, so that's fine. We've got a 1500 high image, so it's 1500 on the longest edge, which is the height. So we can cancel that, and keep in mind that when you've cropped, your layer becomes a floating layer, so we're just going to go and flatten that. So it's now a background layer, which will enable us to save once again. Let's just check save as, just to see. No, we haven't got that available. So we're going to save as a copy, or save a copy. Change from Photoshop to JPEG. Now, keep in mind also that this is the second image that you're creating. So let's call this 2. And it may have been a good idea, in fact it would have been a good idea to put 1 against the landscape crop. So I'm going to save that. Maximum quality, that's okay. Just move off the crop tool. And when I close this image down, I don't want to save it because remember this is still our PSD showing here. I don't want to save that PSD. I don't want to overwrite it. So if we don't save that, we've got our two images saved. Just one more point to make as you work through these tasks. It's really important that you get any questions you have answered. So if you've worked through this video and there's something that you haven't understood, then in the first instance, if you want to get a quick answer to your questions, you're going to have to do your own research into that. Have a look at Google, YouTube. Maybe you can find a tutorial that helps you. But I'm always at the end of an email to answer any questions, and it may not be an instant response, but it is usually fairly quick. Usually it's the same day, often within an hour or two, and sometimes I'll be actually working at my computer when your email comes in, so sometimes I can actually answer it very quickly. But do please email me. I always think it's far better to get an answer to your questions before you move on to the following week, because if there's a gap in your understanding, that will only grow as you go through the weeks, because you'll need to know some of this stuff. Okay, we're now going to move on to where we go from here. So we created our two crops ready to submit. So just coming to Blackboard now. We're going to be uploading to the assignments section. So let's open that up. And here we see the assignments that are currently available to see. You'll notice that assignment A isn't. But the task that we've been working on, the resizing task, is available. So if you click in this section here, and then click to view assessment, you'll see that you can click on the text field and add text and images. So some of the assignments require a bit of text to be added, but mostly it's just images. So if you click on the attachment button, that's how we can add an image. There's also insert content. Don't use that one, that's a different kind of thing. If we choose attachment, we're going to attach the two images that we created, and we can do those both at the same time. And they will be uploaded to Blackboard, where I can then see them and download them. So I will be downloading all of your images and viewing them on my computer. I would just comment that certainly on the older version of Blackboard, the preview image that you saw, I'm not convinced it was the same image as the actual loaded image. I think this might be a thumbnail or a preview image, and sometimes it doesn't quite look exactly the same as what you're expecting. So don't worry, the image that I will be downloading will be exactly as you intended it to be, and I'll grade it from there. So last thing to do when that's all uploaded is submit, and your submission was successful. So you can just close that box, and that is done.